I'm Renee Grebe with Nature Forward. I'm the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate, and we are thrilled to be partnering with Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions to do this Fairfax County Tree Advocates training. So this is you can go to the next slide. This is our second of 4 trainings. And so our first one was last month, talking about the value of trees and addressing the climate crisis. And so we're going right from there where we learned about how to talk about this and maybe some of the local Fairfax County laws and ordinances that affect this topic of being a tree advocate. We're going to go right from that into today, Advocacy 101 with Citizens Climate Lobby. We are so grateful to be partnering with them today for this session. They're going to talk to us about how to talk to legislators one-on-one, legislators and elected officials. That might be local, that might be state. So thank you so much, Citizens Climate Lobby, for being here. And I'm going to hand it off to, first of all, before I do that, thank you to Christine Montagese, who is here with Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions. And you'll be monitoring the chat box and such. So feel free to put your comments in there, say hello, say where you're from, say what you're excited to learn tonight in the chat box. Feel free to do all of those fun things to get to know each other. And I'll hand it off to Rose Hendricks with CCL.
Thank you, Renee. We're really glad to be here. So thank you also for the invitation to share tonight. We will, there we go, be talking about effective advocacy, especially through meeting with elected officials. The 3 primary speakers you'll hear from today, I am Rose Hendricks, but also co-volunteers, Gina Weatherup and Sarah Karish. We also have a few other CCLers who are here to help us with different parts of this workshop. So you'll see Meredith Haynes, Mark Menzer, and Delia Alcorn as well. So it's a full team effort here. We're all volunteers with the Fairfax chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. Today, the 3 main goals and the things we'll cover are first, setting goals and planning, then the different roles to consider during a meeting, and third is balanced listening, which is an approach that we lean into as much as we can for effective meetings. And at the end, you'll have a chance to practice some of the content that we're sharing in a mock meeting with a fictional county supervisor. First, though, very briefly, a little bit about us with Citizens Climate Lobby. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots advocacy organization, and we generally focus on national policies to address climate change. CCL is pretty well known for its respectful approach that aims to build bridges across ideologies in order to create as broad a foundation as possible for climate action. Last year, alongside lots of other climate advocates, we helped push the biggest climate law in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act, across the finish line. Again, we were one of many organizations working for this, but we can take credit for 168,000 calls and emails to Congress and President Biden during the budget reconciliation process. Also, we did phone banking that reached 4.5 million people in targeted states and published 1,300 letters to the editor and op-eds. In addition to the Inflation Reduction Act, we help achieve the passage of 6 smaller bipartisan climate laws. We have 4 primary policy focus areas. The first one is carbon pricing, so that polluters pay for emissions, particularly in a form of a fee and dividend or cashback, and that means households get the revenue from that. We also work on healthy forests, which includes everything from combating illegal deforestation abroad to managing our domestic forests and urban tree canopy and agriculture as well. Building electrification and efficiency. And for that, we really lean into the Inflation Reduction Act and how we can share all of the benefits more broadly. And then finally, clean energy permitting reform so that we can actually realize the emissions reductions of laws like the Inflation Reduction Act to make things more streamlined and have earlier community input so that permitting for clean energy infrastructure and transmission is faster and more effective. These are all various areas that have the opportunities for bipartisanship and also are part of the solutions we need for reducing emissions. CCL's mission statement is we exist to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power. And so tonight we want to share with you some of the tools that CCL has given us so that you can have your own individual breakthroughs in exercising your personal power as climate advocates too. One way of putting that in context, though, is through what we refer to as the 5 levers of political will, recognizing that advocacy can take many forms, and actually the different forms are often complementary and build on each other. So we'll talk in detail about directly engaging elected officials. For us, that's lobbying Congress. As I said, we focus on national policies, but this will apply, the strategies that we talk about apply to meeting with any elected officials. And as I said, we just wanted to note that this fits into a kind of broader suite of advocacy activities, including working with media. I mentioned letters to the editor and op-eds and social media, also grassroots. So going out in the community and talking to everyday people, building political will that way. Grass tops refer to all kinds of community leaders, from local elected officials to faith communities and business owners. And then chapter and volunteer development, making sure that we do have strong chapters to support each other through what can be really long-term and not always easy work. So our approach then to building political will is a focus on relationships. In meeting with our members of Congress or other elected officials, our goals are to build relationships and move our elected officials kind of up a ladder of support for becoming a climate champion. We'll talk a little bit more on that in a moment. And again, that applies to a meeting with any elected official, whatever issue you're advocating about. So we really focus on this as a long-term approach to achieving policy success. In many cases, it takes repeated positive interactions with elected officials, this meetings, phone calls, letters, public appearances, and others, for them to fully understand your perspective, the solutions you're championing, and come around to championing those solutions themselves and actually making them happen. So we do really think of this kind of a long-term relationship building arc. How we achieve this is through respect and appreciation, appealing to the best in others, and really, as much as possible, being for something and emphasizing that angle as well. The key then to relationships from CCL's perspective is finding common ground and building bridges through shared values, social connections, and the places that we care for. And that's all grounded in kind of CCL's one rule, which is treat everyone, even those who disagree with us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. Sometimes you can't do this with a particular elected official because of things they've done or said in the past. And that's okay. In that case, you just would opt to not be part of that meeting. And that's a more effective long-term approach than going into a meeting where you know you're not going to be able to uphold this. One other note on relationships is that we do treat all meetings with elected officials as confidential. So we can share that we had a meeting, and we can also share high-level reflections like, oh, that staffer was so welcoming and informative, or we had a very productive conversation. But we wouldn't repeat things like their views on particular policies or bills outside the meeting, because we trust that they'll make public any views that they choose to make public, and it's not our role to share the things that they tell us. We really want them to trust us. As I said, relationship building is our big goal, and to speak candidly. And so this is one of the commitments we make toward that goal, and we take pretty seriously. Okay. Now I'll transition just briefly to talk a little bit about calibrating your expectations to set goals, and then we'll get into planning. So for us, since relationship building is the key, we think about any given meeting as one step along a path. So the goal for any individual meeting might be very specific, something that serves as one step towards larger long-term goals. For example, as I mentioned at the outset, one of CCL's goals is to see a national carbon cashback or a fee and dividend. But we might go into many specific meetings with members of Congress or their staff with much more specific, smaller goals, like having them speak publicly about the importance of this type of policy. Or we might go in with the goal of learning more about that office's priorities and the opportunities that they see for climate action in Congress. In many cases, these kinds of goals are more realistic than expecting them, like, we'll come out with them co-sponsoring our favorite bill. Sometimes that happens and it's great, and sometimes it is a realistic goal, but for the most part, those more specific, smaller ones make more sense. So your goals for a particular meeting will depend on whatever history you have with the elected official, or if you're starting with a new relationship, then maybe you've done some research and that will help set the stage for your goals. And of course, it depends kind of where they stand on environmental action, what their perspectives are. If we push people kind of too far, too quickly, we know that that can really backfire. So I've mentioned now this climate champion scale at least twice. This is what we mean by it. It can be helpful of thinking about it in terms of steps. So if the person you're meeting with is completely opposed, that top line, to the kind of policy you're advocating for, they're probably not going to pivot and immediately become your fiercest advocate. But you might get them to rethink some of their position and at least get to a sort of neutral place. So that step might make sense. If they're neutral, maybe you can bump them up to a supporter, from supporter to advocate, advocate to leader, and leader to champion. So those are somewhat, the terms are just meant to indicate placeholders. So don't worry too much about exactly what each means. There are very few people who we would call champions. Those are who are out in the community, like talking about the importance of this policy or this bill or whatever. But there are some, and we're always grateful for them. So in practical terms, again, going back to that carbon pricing example, CCL knows that many members of Congress would vote for a bill if it came to the floor. So we could think of those people as supporters. Many of them, though, have actually gone further and have proactively put their name on the bill as co-sponsors. So those we might consider advocates, or some who have written op-eds or spoken to their colleagues asking other colleagues to join the bill. Maybe that's a leader. And then there's this handful of member of Congress who tweet. Sorry, I didn't realize there's probably a different verb for that. Who publish on social media about carbon pricing regularly, and who have tried to get the policy included in the budget reconciliation package that took place in the past that Congress did pass. So some of them were really pushing for it right up to the end, and those would be who we're referring to as champions. Again, the specific gradations don't exactly matter, but rather thinking about how you can kind of encourage an elected official to move up that scale a little bit is the idea there. Great. Gina, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a bit about planning the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you, Rose. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Please feel free to type something in the chat if you're having trouble hearing me. But when we talk about planning the meeting, we want to talk through a number of different things. And we're going to start off by talking about what is the goal for the meeting. So Rose, you can go to the next slide. The most important thing to do is to make sure everyone involved in the meeting understands why the meeting is happening. So it's usually helpful to start off by explicitly articulating whatever your primary goal or goals might be for the meeting with the folks that you're planning it with. Sometimes we might make assumptions about what the goal is, and we don't even realize we're making assumptions. But if we take a moment to really talk about the purpose of the meeting with everyone who's involved, we can make sure we're all on the same page before the meeting happens. And the next thing that we plan is an appreciation. So this is an opportunity to say thank you to whoever you're meeting with. And it can really be almost anything, as long as you feel authentically grateful or appreciative of something they've done, right? So Rose talked about these different sort of tiers of supporters to leaders that we think about at CCL. And it might be as simple as thanks for letting us know in our last private meeting that you would like to vote for the carbon cashback bill. Or it might be thanks so much, we were excited to see that op-ed that you published about stopping climate change. It's an important component of relationship building. So it's important not to skip the step, but again, always to find something that someone in your group can genuinely say thank you for. So another option might be something not related to the environment, but that a constituent has seen that this person has done and really feels grateful for. Next, we want to determine what the primary and potentially maybe a supporting ask would be. So this will follow from whatever your goals are for having the meeting in the first place. But typically, it's something very specific you want to ask the person to commit to. So it might be, please vote a specific way, please make a public statement, please go to a different member in this body, whether it's Congress or Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, and ask them to do something. One example is CCL all across the country is having lobby meetings with members of Congress this week. And in every single meeting, no matter who we're meeting with, we're all asking our members of Congress to co-sponsor one specific bill. That's the primary ask. It's what we've determined to be the most important thing that we want to take time to talk about with people. And we like to have a supporting ask because it gives us something that might be a slightly lower priority, but an additional discussion point that we can ask about and engage in some back and forth dialogue about. It might be a lower priority. Sometimes it's very straightforward. Sometimes it's not. As advocates, you all get the opportunity to go in and ask for two things, and maybe you get one of them. 50% is pretty good. The next thing you want to do is brainstorm a list of possible open-ended questions that people participating in your meeting might want to ask this official that you're meeting with. So open-ended questions are important because they're how you really keep the conversation going, right? You don't want to go into a advocacy meeting or a lobby meeting with an elected official and have it be similar to this presentation, right? You don't want to have one person speaking the whole time. You're seeking to really create a conversation. So when you think about open-ended questions, you think about things that can't easily be answered with yes or no. It gives the folks you're meeting with an opportunity to see that you really value their opinion on whatever the topic may be. And it gives them an opportunity to have a more meaningful discussion, especially important if the first and second asks that you've had are whether they were easily agreed to or whether they were flat out no's. You don't want to just have that be the only thing happening in the meeting. You want to build that relationship. So the next thing to think about, and this is all in the planning stages, remember, is what are the materials we will need? Are there any materials that we think are really going to add value to this conversation or to what we're expecting might be the next steps when we're done with this meeting? So examples might include information about policies like one-pagers or endorsements, statistics about the impact of the policy, anything else that may have been enacted in a different location that's similar to this. It could be constituent letters. Sometimes it's news articles. And then the last thing to think about is to think about the meeting roles. So we try very hard to make sure that everyone has a speaking role in the meeting. And so CCL has a whole long list, or you can go to the next slide, Rose, has a fairly, I think, long list of potential roles for a meeting. And sometimes multiple things are handled by one person, or you'll have a big enough group that everyone gets to play a role. You can go to the next slide. So we'll start with talking about the leader. This might be the person who's actually planning the meeting. In the CCL congressional meeting I took part in yesterday, our leader was our congressional liaison, so the person who has a close relationship with staff in that office. What's important for the leader is that they have the big picture in mind. They're the person who is articulating why this meeting is happening. They have a strategy around it. They're making sure everything about the meeting supports this strategy. It's often an experienced volunteer who may have been in these kinds of meetings before. It's ideal if it can be a constituent because elected officials always like to know who might potentially vote for them. And it can be helpful to sort of set a tone for everyone else that the leader really has a personal stake in this. The leader will also help to determine what are the other meeting roles that we're going to talk through. So we can go to the next slide on that. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll talk first about what the leader actually does in the meeting. The first thing is the leader does empower participation. It comes back to the point that I was going to get to, which you'll see on the next slide, about what are these other roles. The leader is actually going to ask people to play specific roles and then manage that participation in the meeting. So they might introduce people as they're going to speak, or they might say, I also want to thank, Sarah, who's going to make sure that we are respectful of your time here today because she's our timekeeper, as an example. The leader might also be handling transitions from one topic to another. Can ask any open-ended questions unless someone else has been given that role. Basically tries to keep the meeting on track and will be in charge generally of the supporting or follow-up details. They will also help determine, like, what are the supporting asks, what are the primary asks, unless there's someone else in the organization that's figuring that out for you. So some of the other roles in the meeting. We generally like to designate someone as the appreciator. As I was talking about earlier, it's really helpful to build a relationship with the elected official if you can genuinely thank them for something they've done. So the appreciator is responsible for finding one or two things that they can say thank you to the person you're meeting with. Sometimes we have that person speak right up front as part of the sort of introduction to the meeting. I mentioned timekeeper or time monitor. So this is someone who will actually reconfirm at the beginning of the meeting with the person you're meeting with how much time is available. And sometimes they'll say this to us, right? Like, oh, can you confirm that, like, how much time I need to be in this meeting? Or they'll say to you, well, I need to, make sure we're out of here in half an hour. So then but you want to know that up front, and they may not offer it. So we want the time monitor to ask that question. The person will also monitor ballpark wise how much time different people are talking. So we usually like to strive for 50% us, all the advocates in the meeting talking, 50% the elected official or their staff member talking. You might have a different goal if this is entirely new to the person you're talking with. You might expect that your group is going to do some more of the talking, but the time monitor will note those things and be able to say, you know what, I see that we're about halfway through our time. Do we need to move forward to another topic? The third role listed is note taker, and this is a very valuable role. It's not someone who necessarily has to speak up, but they need to be able to follow the thread of the conversation and capture in the notes what the person you're meeting with is saying. So whether it's an elected official, a staff person, or some other county leader, the note taker is going to capture what they're saying, what they're agreeing to, what they may say is a reason they don't support what you're asking them. This person can also tally up the number of open-ended questions that your group has asked, if that's something that you want to track and discuss after the fact. Number 4, the asker is the person who's actually making those primary and secondary asks. Depending on your group, you might even have 2 askers, one person to talk about the primary reason, the primary ask, and one person to make the secondary ask. The deliverer is the person who brings any of those materials that you thought would be helpful for the elected official to know about this topic. The person who's assigned follow-up does the follow-up. They'll send, maybe there's additional materials, or they'll send a thank you card, or they may schedule another meeting with them if that's something that was agreed to happen during the meeting. Then there's the photographer, who it's always a good idea to get a picture of the meeting that you've been in, as long as you have their permission, of course. Even when we do it on Zoom, we will say, oh, is it okay to take a picture, just a screenshot? Or in person, you can all kind of gather around and someone can take a picture. If you do have their permission, you should definitely post that on social media. This way it kind of gathers some attention, both for that elected official and for your group, to let people know that you are serious about what you're talking about. A couple of optional roles might be tech support if you're doing this online, or an observer. So sometimes someone who's brand new to this might want to take just an observer role and see how everything else is playing out. So now that I've talked through all the roles, I want to move into the basic meeting outline. The beginning is when you say those thank yous, ask about the time, make introductions, and state your purpose. In the middle of the meeting, you'll have really a discussion, and the primary ask might happen right away at the beginning, or it might happen sometime in the middle, right? Because don't necessarily always know exactly how this person will respond to that primary ask, and you want to find out what they think about it. So this is where you're really exchanging ideas and listening and asking those open-ended questions. And finally, at the end of the meeting, Rose, could you hit the next button, please? Thank you. You might ask any supporting asks if you have one. You might ask any clarifying questions. You might do the photo at this time. Sometimes I've done that right up front at the beginning. And you'll clarify follow-up items, right? So you will explicitly state that the elected official agreed to do whatever they may have agreed to do, or that your group has agreed to do something, send information, look into a topic that came up that was new to you, whatever it may be. You want to say these things out loud explicitly so that everyone's on the same page before the end of the meeting. And of course, you also want to say thank you for taking the time to meet with us. And I can pause now and ask if there are any questions. If there are no questions, then I can turn it over, I believe, to Sarah.
Great. Thanks, Gina. So we are going to move on to how to facilitate good communication. So Rose, would you mind? Yeah, thank you. You've heard about sort of the mechanics of the meeting and the different roles and the flow of it. So now we wanted to focus a little more specifically on tools for good communication that you can use throughout the meeting. And the first thing to remember is you want to make it a conversation, not a lecture. So in terms of strategies, a key thing to remember is, Rose talked a lot about relationship building. So even if you have a very specific goal for your meeting, your broader goal is to make them want to see you again. To do this, you want to find bridge issues with them. Even if we don't see eye to eye with the person, we can always look for common ground. We can say, where can we say, I agree with you? And you look for those things as you do your research before the meeting, and you can also keep an ear out for them during the meeting. You want to avoid overloading the person with too much information. So instead, you want to focus on opportunities to build trust. And as Gina was talking about, it's easy to kind of fall into asking yes or no questions, but it is really valuable if we can brainstorm open-ended questions ahead of time. And then you can sort of use those throughout your meeting to get the conversation moving. And there may come a time in the conversation when you need a yes or no question. You have to, confirm what you heard, clarify that they are indeed going to do something they said they were going to do, or that they hold a particular position. But that sort of comes later. And you also should be okay with allowing some silence. You can give them time to think about things before they answer. So when we talk about open-ended questions, I just wanted to provide some examples here. So on the left are some kind of basic yes or no questions, things that you might really want to know if you are a tree advocate meeting with a county supervisor. So your question might be, do you agree that the county should force developers to preserve all large trees? Well, that's a yes or no question and isn't necessarily going to really help build this relationship or allow you to hear sort of the nuance about their ideas. So a better approach might be to say something like, what are your thoughts on how to preserve tree canopy as the county develops? To take another example, you might want to know, do you support increasing the budget and staff for urban forest management? Instead, you could try asking, what kind of staff support do you think is needed to ensure that the county can reach its goals when it comes to preserving and expanding tree canopy? So now it's going to be your turn. If everybody could try to think about some open-ended questions about tree policy or about climate action that you might be able to use in a conversation with an elected official. So Rose is going to start the timer, and you can think about that and type your ideas into the chat, please. Some good ideas. Keep adding. All right, great. So let's see. How important do you feel the urban forest or tree canopy is to Fairfax County? That's a great open question. Are there ways that we could improve forestry staffing in the current budget? I like that because it's, acknowledging the constraints that they might feel they're up against. How can the county meet its aggressive goals on climate change? What are your thoughts on what the greatest risks are to our current tree canopy? What infrastructure is needed to adequately reduce carbon emissions? Okay, these are really awesome ideas, and I think you all get the concept of open-ended questions. Now we're going to move on to what you do after you pose an open-ended question. So once you pose the question, you want to sort of engage in what we call these steps for balanced listening. You need to listen to the answer that comes and respond in a way that's going to sort of build connection and build rapport, and also allow you to introduce the points that you want to make, and make it sort of a continuing conversation. So Rose and Delia are going to help me now by demonstrating a conversation with some balanced listening.
Hey, everybody.
All right, so in our scenario, Rose is meeting with Supervisor Taylor Green. So Delia is going to play that role. And Rose has just presented her ask, which is to increase funding for the Fairfax County Park Authority. And now she's going to kick off some discussion with an open-ended question.
Supervisor Green, what are your thoughts about how we can make sure the Park Authority has the funding it needs to advance equity and ensure natural resources are protected and managed properly?
Yeah, well, it's tough because I can see that we really want everybody to be able to benefit from our parks, and we also have to maintain what we have. But we also have a lot of other needs right now when it comes to public safety and schools. We need to maintain the high quality of life that we have in Fairfax County. On the whole, I think our parks are doing well, and most of my constituents have only good things to say about them. So is this really something that requires more funding now?
Okay, so now it's time for Rose to reflect back and connect.
It sounds like you're concerned about ensuring that we're funding our most pressing needs. We're also concerned about maintaining the high quality of life we enjoy here. When parks aren't maintained, we lose trees that have a wide range of benefits, including cleaner air, reducing stormwater runoff, and capturing carbon. And when some county residents can't access parks at all, they miss out on the recreational opportunities and health benefits.
I worry that just throwing money at the park system isn't really going to make a big dent in the issue. We have lots of parks across the country, and part of me wonders if it's really that people can't access the park or if they're just prioritizing other things.
So, if you were Rose, you might be tempted here to argue with the supervisor and point out why you think she's wrong. But instead, Rose is going to try to highlight agreement.
I agree, it's frustrating that many of our neighbors don't seem to appreciate the beauty around us and just drive by our wonderful parks.
And now Rose can ask permission to share some information.
May I tell you what I understand about park access?
Sure.
So, that step may seem a little funny. It may seem unnecessary to ask, if you can share. But basically, we've found that people are more receptive to information. They're asked if they want it or not. So it's pretty rare that somebody will say no. But if they do, you just need to go back to the earlier steps and again, try to build rapport. But in this case, since the supervisor said yes, Rose is going to go ahead and share some of what she knows.
Have you heard of the 330-300 rule of thumb? This is the idea that everyone should be able to see at least 3 trees from their home, have 30% tree canopy cover in their neighborhood, and live within 300 meters of a park or green space. Research has shown that people who live in places that meet these benchmarks have better mental health outcomes than those who don't. So even if we take people's personal choices out of the equation, proximity to trees and green space makes a difference.
That's an interesting fact. But even if we were able to increase the FCPA budget, we can't change where people live or create parks overnight.
So now Rose can make some more points if she wants, or she can follow up with another open-ended question.
You're right that this is a long-term issue, and increasing the budget in the next year will only help us take a small step in the direction of making sure we're following the 330-300 rule. One initiative in particular that FCPA has proposed that would make a pretty big difference is a mobile nature center, which would allow people living in areas with insufficient tree cover and green spaces to experience some of the benefits immediately for a fraction of the cost of creating new parks. What do you see as the most promising ways we can start working toward living up to the 330-300 rule?
So this is sort of how the conversation can continue, for sort of as much time as you have in the meeting. You want to continue listening, reflecting, and sharing small bits of information. And then you stop. You give them some time to think about things, and it can take a few conversations for people to change their point of view. But open-ended questions are really the key to all of this because it encourages the person to talk. And as Gina mentioned, we want the other person to talk, hopefully even more than we're talking. So I think Gina said we aim for the other person to be doing 50% of the talking. I have in my notes 75% of the talking. I mean, either one of those is sort of an aspirational number, and we very often don't quite succeed, but it is good to aspire to something like that because, again, most people are more likely to become convinced of something if they believe it was their idea in the first place. So with this kind of a process, you can guide them to a particular conclusion, but it's less likely to work if you're forcing them to swallow your logic. So I think now we have time for questions. I hope we have some. And feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, well, I guess we're super clear. So no questions. Yes.
I have a question. I'm just putting it in the chat right now.
Oh, awesome.
And you can feel free to unmute, raise your hand. Whichever way you'd like to ask the question is totally fine.
So how do you respond if they ask a question you don't have a good answer to? Oh, that's a great question. And it has a great answer. The answer is I don't know, but I'd be happy to get back to you. And that, you know, I don't know what kind of question you actually had in mind. But very often, you know, there's a factual answer or some kind of analysis that you can provide, and this really is a good opportunity because it gives you a chance to reconnect with the person and again build the relationship. So it gives you an excuse to write to them or meet with them again. So, any other questions? All right. Well,
Not,
hopefully,
not a question, but if you got a moment, I'll give some thoughts about some of the things you said, because I was involved in meetings yesterday and today using this method with CCL for some congressional visits, and we talked about building trust. And the two meetings that we had were so opposite in that way. One was with a congressman's office that we've been working with for years and years, and the same staff people for years and years. And there was so much trust there. In fact, at one point we said, can we record this meeting just for our own notes? And the staff person said, well, we would never let anybody do that. But since we've worked with you for so long and trust you, that'd be fine. So that was one extreme. The other extreme was somebody that we've only started working. So, I mean, you know, the trust, we just haven't had time to build up trust. The first time we met with this congressperson's staff, they were like, you know, like, who are you? What do you want? You know, you could see they were quite standoffish. And now by the second meeting it was, okay, yeah, I know what you want. I understand. I'm starting, you know, to understand what you want, and I'm listening. But, you know, that's as much as trust as there was. Going back to the first meeting, I felt like we were almost part of the congressperson's team. The congressperson's teams wanted us to succeed, and they know we wanted them to succeed. So it is all about trust, and we will get there with the second congressperson also over time. But it does take some time, and it makes all the difference in how much you get out of it.
that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. That's really helpful. Alex asks, if you are new to climate advocacy, how can you get started in talking to officials? How can you connect with other people interested in advocacy? What factors into the decision calculus for which officials you choose to talk to? Oh, those are great questions. So yeah, I think you know, you get started by joining one of the great groups represented here, whether it's FACS, Nature Forward, or CCL, or of course, there's many other good organizations, but you know, you are a lot more effective in a group and with a team, and all of these organizations have, you know, things that they've thought about, sort of agendas for you, and hopefully support. I know in our case CCL is a national organization, and it has a lot of training on both how to lobby and the substance of what we're lobbying for. You know, that's how we're able to do it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big issue. And in terms of what officials you're going to talk to, I think it depends on you know, what kind of policy you have to see, you'd like to see. If it's if you're talking about sort of very local things, you know, tree policy is often something that happens on a very local level, then of course you know, a great place to start would be your county board of supervisors. But if like us, you want to see federal climate action, then you're going to want to go where they make federal policy, and that's Congress. So great. So I think now we are getting ready to move into our practice meetings. So everybody now will get a chance to participate in a mock meeting with a fictional county supervisor. Christina is going to put people in breakout groups where you'll be with one CCL volunteer playing the role of the county supervisor. So I think we could go to the next slide, Rose, and we can introduce the scenario. So you're going to be meeting with the same supervisor we heard from in the demonstration before, Taylor Green. Although in this case, Taylor Green might have different perspectives. Who knows? Anything could happen at this meeting. And you're going to be asking them to increase park authority funding. So in your groups, you'll have 10 or 15 minutes to meet with the team, divide up roles, plan the agenda, and brainstorm open-ended questions. And then you'll have another 10 minutes or so for the actual meeting. So it'll be a little bit compressed, but hopefully a good one. So I will, let's see here, try to put this in the chat. Okay, so that doc, hopefully that's the right one. Yeah, that has all your information about this meeting exercise, a little, bio of Supervisor Green, again, the primary ask, and some background and talking points for it. And then at the bottom, the different potential roles are listed. So I think that we're ready to go to breakouts, right?
I have a general question. I guess I'll ask it as people coming back. Is the experience with county supervisors that they prefer a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting? And are they generous with their time, or I suppose, yeah, I just wonder what typically planning for a 30-minute meeting seems fine, but I've certainly done some lobbying in Richmond where it was, well, I've got time between this building and that building, walk with me. And so it's quite a different, you kind of have to have a flexible agenda.
I think it's good.
I've had meetings with Supervisor Harity, and he was open. I think we had half an hour when we went into that meeting. So we had a number of points that the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions wanted us to present. And, he's the only Republican on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, but he listened and we had good conversations, and there were some things that we agreed on. So it came out positive, I believe. Of course, he always wants to cut taxes and budgets, but he did support having an expansive tree canopy and trying to protect the tree canopy. That's one of the things we talked about.
And was that an in-person meeting, or were you on?
Yeah, that was in person, and I had a couple other people with me from the Springfield district, who we each had their own issues to present, and I thought it worked out pretty well. I have to do a follow-up. I haven't done that too well about following up. But he's in a position where he really is pro-development as well, and that all these developments are what is causing the decrease in the tree canopy. They just go over there and they clear cut all the trees, and it's gone, and you're not being replaced. And that was one of the things that I think we need to focus on in Fairfax County, because we need the we need the shade and we need the oxygen produced by those and the carbon capture. And every time we take away more trees, we're putting ourselves in a vulnerable position.
I would say for the kind of the general question about how generous are they with their time, how do you meet? It's kind of up to them. If it's a really busy week, they might prefer Zoom. So ask them if you prefer an in-person. I would ask that up front that you would love to do an in-person. That can be really impactful, being there face to face, but Zoom can be really convenient. So it might depend on how big your group might be meeting with your supervisor. And I think in general, I found the supervisors I've met with so far, they give you a time slot and you can usually take the whole time slot. And if it gets exciting and they keep talking, you just keep smiling, letting them talk so you can learn.
So, would you say that it's easier to meet over Zoom with large groups or in person with large groups? I'm assuming the former, but just a question of clarification, I suppose.
You'll have a take on that?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's interesting because we're meeting with members of Congress or their staff, and typically if you're meeting with them on Capitol Hill, they have very small offices there. So that's one, if you're doing a face-to-face, that's physical limitation. So you try not to bring more than 5 people really to the office. But if sometimes I've been in meetings like I was at my first CCL meeting, lobby meeting was with Congressman Connolly, but it was in his district office. And so he has a lot more room there. So I think we brought like 12 or 13 people. It was great. But if you do that, it can sort of make an impression, but it's hard to set it up so that everybody can speak. It can sometimes then introductions can take forever and ever. So, and so that goes for Zoom meetings too, but of course it's easier on Zoom for everybody to get there. And if some people don't, get a speaking role, well, at least they haven't traveled to get there.
Yeah, we have exactly as Sarah's saying, taken note of, sometimes it's different people who can participate on Zoom versus in person. Today, as you've heard from some of us in CCL, we have had a lot of lobby meetings this week, and we had like a student who had just stepped out of school, and a few of us who were in the middle of the workday, but someone could get away with a lunch break meeting and things like that. And so you get to hear perspectives from people who maybe wouldn't be able to make the trip, never mind to Capitol Hill, but even to a supervisor's in-person office. So sometimes that's an important consideration too.
Yeah, that's a great highlight. We had a woman that we partnered with for some local advocacy, and she had an autoimmune disorder that didn't allow her to do in-person things. And she was so grateful for being able to do it on Zoom, and told her personal story. It was very impactful. And we were talking about how important parks were during COVID. So it really tied in very nicely with that, which is why she decided to speak up with us. So yeah, I think it's very situational. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, unless you're space constrained.
I know you mentioned a student being involved in advocacy. I mean, a lot of why I'm on this meeting is just for future reference, but I'd also love to get involved as a high school student in advocacy groups. Do you know what jobs students can take on while juggling schoolwork and what they're able to do as a minor?
Yeah, from our perspective, they can do pretty much everything. To go to in-person events, you'll, if you're a minor CCL in particular, I'm not sure if the other organizations are similar, would have you have technically a sort of sponsor who just makes sure you're all set and they're there if you need anything. But we actually don't have any. Well, Sarah and Gina can speak to this both better because their kids are participants in CCL, but we generally welcome all ages to participate. And I think that would be true of the other groups as well.
And I will add, because Sarah and I got this question tabling on election day. we had an opportunity for people to basically write letters to, in this case, it happened to be Representative Wexton in Loudoun County, saying, would you please co-sponsor this bill to put a price on carbon? And the student, a high school student, I think she said she was 15, filled it out, but handed it to her mom to put down contact information. And we said, no, you can put your own down. Just because you can't vote doesn't mean that you can't express to any elected official what you think, because you are actually still a constituent that they represent. So Rose is absolutely right. Like, there's constraints because it's harder to get places on your own, because you have to be in school very specific hours. That applies to a lot of jobs, but not all jobs. But you can do pretty much all the things. You actually can lobby as a volunteer person. You can write to elected officials. You can talk to other people about the issue. And Sarah's daughter and my daughter have spoken in front of the Fairfax County School Board on how important the issue of climate change is to them. And they only got involved with that because of CCL's National Youth Action Team.
Awesome.
I've found that sometimes high school students like to often start out by doing some research that makes them feel comfortable being the researcher, maybe research a politician or an issue, and then maybe get involved with the social media aspect of the work, because they tend to know that better than some of us older folks, and then kind of find their way into other positions and feel more comfortable speaking after a while, and work your way in that way. So that's one avenue that you might think about.
I'd say it also can be really powerful to partner up with organizations that have talking points, so that you can come into a meeting and just read a talking point. You can trust that organization to have the right info. And if you're with other people who are experts, they can supplement a question that might come up, or help with any kind of support in that meeting. That's a lot of trust for an organization to be able to not put that research in, to make sure it's all accurate. But that's another avenue, depending on how brave you want to go.
So do we have some final slides?
Sylvia, did you have one quick question before?
Oh, sure.
No?
No, but I was just saying, if Alex is interested in actual hands-on working at a restoration site in volunteer aspect is another great way, because it shows that you're involved, and then you can speak from that experience that you've seen, the problem with invasive plants in the parks or whatever. So you're coming from your own experience as well as what you've learned as far as an advocate.
Thank you. These are really wonderful questions and generative discussion. We have just a few points left that I'll share my screen one more time to kind of close the loop, I suppose, on the whole meeting. You're seeing my screen? Okay, all right, great. It didn't look quite right. So that's the what to do after it. So you have a meeting, however well it goes, and then the supervisor or whoever leaves, what to do. Well, we recommend having a way to debrief. So this might be you all stick on the Zoom line if that's what it is, or if you're in person, you just step into another space. So you see folks here in the hallway, and you just need a few minutes while people have things fresh on their mind to quickly go over impressions, make sure everybody is on the same page about what needs to happen next, if there are any specific follow-ups, and who will do those things. You sign a thank you card or send a thank you email. Sometimes an email works, or you can use a site like Kudos board. It's one of those.
Put it on board, yeah.
Thank you. To send a sort of fancier thank you email. In person, we like to have a physical card that we all just quickly sign and pop back in and hand to whoever's there at the front door. And then, making sure that your follow-up is timely. So sending whatever you can as quickly as possible, unless it's something that requires, significant research. Of course, they'd understand. Another thing for us that is more of a CCL thing, but I think actually helps us quite a bit, is we do either verbally read or send around by email the notes, and everybody has a chance to look at them, say, oh, wait, like that's what the fill in some gaps, or say that's actually not quite what I heard, and clarify anything. In our notes also, we also track the number of open-ended questions we asked the person, because again, we are striving to ask many. And so by knowing that we are tracking them, that does keep us accountable to really prioritize open-ended questions. And the other thing we try to do is estimate the percentage of the time that the person or people we were speaking with spoke, as opposed to us, the advocacy group. As you heard, 50 or 75 is a laudable goal, and we don't quite make either of them most of the time. But again, knowing that you're kind of tracking what percentage of the time you're speaking helps you to be mindful of doing more listening and asking as well. So those are included in our notes too. We do have a moment for questions, but before that, we also have, I guess, one more thing, which is a helpful starting place, is looking up your elected officials if you don't already know. As I think is clear, and many of you are already well aware, as constituents and residents, we have the right to reach out to our elected officials anytime about issues that matter to us. We certainly encourage being involved in groups, because then you have a team to work with, you have more power as a group. You also have opportunities to benefit from organizational strategy and such, so that you're all on the same page and really kind of power in numbers. But again, you don't necessarily need to wait for a group or a specific opportunity to come up. And it's always helpful to know your elected officials. We recommend like following them on social media, subscribing to their newsletters, things like that. So you start to understand what they really care about and the things that they're doing. And those give you helpful pieces of information for when you do ultimately get to meet with them. So I will leave it there with a really, again, a big thank you to all of you for joining, especially for jumping into a mock meeting, which sometimes feels like a little bit of a stretch. Certainly thank you to Facts and Nature Forward for inviting us, and also to the whole CCL team who came out to here to be multiple supervisors. This was a really fun workshop for us. We were certainly happy to connect again following this event. You're all welcome to join our meetings. I'm sure you're all welcome to join Facts and Nature Forward meetings as well. But yeah, we appreciated this opportunity. Thanks again.